Good morning. It's great to welcome you all today and to be together as we officially launch into the fall. I certainly want to welcome all of our college students who are here. We're glad you guys, there's 3 of y'all are clapping. Thank you, it's welcome. We know you've already celebrated y'all. But this is also, we got a lot of things happening around our church. You know, fall is kind of, y'all know my favorite time of year. I like the week after Christmas and before New Year because it's the prep time for the new year. And fall is kind of like that, except you get to buy school supplies, which makes it even better, right? You get to buy pencils and all kinds of fun stuff. And so we're going to kind of treat this like a new year. There's going to be new rhythms, new routines. Target is full again and traffic's bad and all the things that go along with this time of year. Some of you you're in a new grade, you're in a new school, you're in a new city. Lots of things that are new. So you're going to have all kinds of new patterns. And the great things about this time of year is you actually get to arrange your life according to what you would like your life to be like. You get a choice. You get to set your schedule and set your sort of trajectory in the way that you would like to. And so what I want to encourage you, and again, we're going to talk about this because especially those of you who are moving into college or you're moving into a new school year or into a new sort of season, the habits of your routines, the way in which you arrange your life in the next 2 weeks are likely going to determine what your entire semester is like. So what you do, the choices you make, the way you organize and arrange your life, the places you go, the connections you make are likely to determine the next 3 months, 3.5 months of your life and perhaps beyond. And so what we want to do is we want to extend ourselves to you in that way and sort of help us all to rethink about some things so we can set the trajectory of our falls in a particular course. A lot of people, they just experiment with stuff and they end up look back and have a bunch of regrets. And then once you regret the first time, it usually just becomes an experimentation there on in. I want us to start a little bit differently today. I want us to consider how it is that we order our lives and some practices that we're going to talk about over the next, over the fall to actually help you experience or begin to find the kind of life that you actually long for, deeply long for. And so part of this idea is to sort of consider as we begin, if you've been around Port City, you will find this to be very different from the way I normally draw human beings. And if you're laughing, that's because you know. We'll get there in just a minute. But what I want you to consider is you sort of think about the fall and what you want and the life that you long for. What is it that you long? What is in the center? I'm talking about the center of your life. What's in the center of your life that's sort of demanding or longing or wanting or hoping? What is it? For some of you, we find sort of our significance. This is going to be looks like a rabbit, but it's not. It's a thumb. Does that make sense? It's approval. We want people to like us. For others of us, right, it's sort of this image that we project. We want the perception of our lives. That's what we're concerned about. How are people going to see us and perceive us in the world? How are we going to be approved of? For others, it's sort of your status. It's your influence. It's your accomplishments. It's your success. There's something that's in the center driving you, sort of setting the pursuits. For others of you, it's relationships. And I'm just going to draw a ring. I recognize there's more, but you get the idea. The relationships. And so all of these things sort of define or say, this is what you want. This is what you're after. This is what's the center of all of your pursuits, the center of your life, how you are going to define your life. If you get these things, you'll sort of think, oh, this will make me happy. And you're going to order your world around this. You're going to instinctively create patterns or fall into patterns based on however strongly these things pull at you. It's why most of us, when we think about, at least in my generation, you thought about going to get a good education or to get a good job, and it was sort of centered down here. A generation now is a little bit different. It probably falls more up here in the sense of how are we seen? How are we perceived? What's the image? What's our brand, right? It's all these things, but it's going to determine the trajectory of your life, the decisions that you make, the way that you organize or order your life. When we talk about spiritual practices, we talk about prayer, we talk about journaling, we talk about spending our lives or living our lives before God, using devotional time or quiet time or whatever term you call it. I believe deeply in those things. We have all kinds of ways to help you do that through our online devotions and a lot of other resources and places just because they're practices. But I want to remind you, we grew up in a culture, right, that has a reason for practice. You practice in order to be, and my guess is you practice makes what? Perfect, right? And this is part of the problem. Because a lot of us, right, how many of you guys are in here, you were going to talk about this in the series, are just plagued by perfectionism? You are like a perfectionist to the hilt. And okay, let me ask you this about how many of you are sitting next to a perfectionist, right? Because that's more the truth. I'm not a perfectionist. I just like things done a particular way. And so we have this idea. What I remind you of is that the normal course, the normal order that you were born into because you were born into this world, or maybe more aptly into this culture, because you've been born when and where you've been born, the normal order of your life is governed by fear, almost instinctively, right? We start this, we're afraid we're going to miss out. We're afraid we're going to make the wrong decision. We're afraid of not having enough. We're afraid of not being in control. We're afraid of not getting what we want. We're afraid of letting someone down. We're afraid of missing our opportunity or not maximizing our potential. And almost every decision we end up being made is trying to it's because we're afraid of doing something wrong or not helpful. And so there's the fear of missing out, right, on some experience. And so we arrange our lives around this. And we're always pulled in these sort of directions. And what we sort of think is if we can just get these things in order, then we'll find what we're looking for. And there's a great book by a guy named John Ortberg. He wrote a book called Soul Keeping. It's one of the best books I've read on this particular topic. And he says this. He says, I was operating under the unspoken assumption that my inner world, that my inner world would be filled with life, peace, and joy once my external world was perfect. If I can just get all my circumstances to line up, the right education, the right major, the right job, the right relationship, if I can just get all these things lined up, then I'll find the sort of sense of life, of fulfillment that I'm longing for. And what happens is we collide with a whole different way of thinking about this, and you get a say in this. That whenever let me back up. What happens to us in this system is that you learn that you cannot trust your center. You cannot trust your center because you've tried something that didn't work, and so maybe you've tried it harder and you keep thinking if you can just do this better, then perhaps it'll finally work. And so what we have to ask ourselves is what is it or where is it that we're going to derive the source of our lives? Where is this going to come? The source of fulfillment, where is it going to come from? What this is going to be, this source is actually going to drive you to understand your sense of sufficiency, the sense of satisfaction to say, this is enough, this is complete, this is perfect, I am full. I'm not talking about barely, I'm talking about living fully and living freely, but there's a source, and we've got to be, if there's never enough, right, there's never going to be a sufficiency, there's a sense of sufficiency. And the challenge with our culture is we sort of created some solutions to this problem that we see. And when I was growing up, it started with a movement in the realm of self-esteem. If you can just buttress a kid's self-esteem, then they will find these other things. And now we sort of progress beyond that into self-compassion or self-worth. We can just buttress the things about ourselves. We can believe in ourselves more. If we can stand up for ourselves or whatever these things are, we'll find this sort of place. And we've created entire industries around self-help and self-care. Does anyone notice a thread? Because what begins to get sort of pushed forward is that if you can just take care of yourself, then you will be okay. Then you will find a sense of sufficiency. And this gets pushed forward because we learn that we have to develop a source or a sense of self-sufficiency, not realizing that wherever you draw your sufficiency is what will be in the center. And if you are someone who is dead set on being self-sufficient, you will end up being self-centered. And I'm not saying this as a critique. I'm saying this as a statement of fact. This is what happens to all of us. We all live in this. So how is it that we sort of fight this or derive something differently than this? What happens in this sense of when we become self-centered, it's not just that you're selfish or self-absorbed. Those things are parts of it, but self-centeredness actually expresses itself in demand. It's a subtle demand. You are looking for someone to fill or something to fill you, to bring a sense of fullness to you, and you're going to use other people to do it. It's a subtle sense of demand. What happens in self-centeredness is you begin to pull people into yourself and you demand that they understand you. You demand that they notice you. You demand that they meet your need. You demand that they, all the different things that start to play in this in. We're subtly demanding this from one another. And what happens is the vortex of self-centeredness just spirals into oblivion. You pull everything else into your sort of world. And what we now have is a whole bunch of people who are trying to pull themselves into their own worlds, and we're ending up more and more isolated and more alone. There's a whole different way in which we've been created and called to live. There's an erosion in this model of the life that we are actually looking for. Our lives end up being driven by what it is we are demanding from other people, whether it's approval or acceptance or to think what I'm doing is cool or valid or valuable or some sense of security or whatever it might be. And we're demanding this from other people. And we walk around doing this. Every human being, every one of you under the sound of my voice, every human being is longing to be loved. All of us are. We're built for it. We're created for it. We're longing to be loved. And one of my little sort of quippy, Mike-isms, I have a little journal and I just keep some of these things that I just used over time, just in a little spot in my journal. And that if you don't feel fully loved, attention becomes a very cheap substitute. And this is how a lot of us end up living our lives. We're just pulling and pulling and taking, and everybody's trying to take from each other, and we all end up being isolated and alone. If you were to ask, sort of in this world, what's the ordering principle? What's the rule of life? It would be take care of yourself. If you can find yourself, if you can take care of yourself, then you'll be able to live the life that you have wanted. Jesus was also asked a similar question as this. He was asked a question that said, what is the ordering rule of life? What's the most important command? And before we do this, I want you to consider something. That as human beings, we have not been made just to be ourselves, but we have been made to be ourselves in light of something else. And we are made and created to bear the image of God who is described as love. That is the thing that human beings are designed and created to be. And what you and I have to decide, right, is what we believe about this. When Jesus was asked this rule of life, what's the most important command that you can keep? In one passage, Jesus responded by saying, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. In Mark chapter 12, here's how he records it. They said, Jesus, what's the most important rule we can follow? What's the most important way we can order our lives around? Jesus says, the most important one, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. This was like a prefix. This was the Shema. This would have been sort of bringing everybody into the same place. What is the most important? Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is our God, the Lord is one. And then he says this, love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, or with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And the word for soul there is the word psyche. Like we used to say psych back in the day, it's like the word psyche. It's the whole thing where psychology derives from. It's all that idea. And what you begin to see is Jesus adds this other place in there. He says, what is it about our soul? We all know this is sort of our heart, right? This is the center. This is the place where our desires and our will sort of exist. This is where our emotions and our thinking exist. And then our bodies they're not just our physical expressions. It's the first place of dominion that we exercise as creatures made in God's image. When he said, I want you to subdue and to rule over the earth and exercise dominion over that which has been created. The first place we're given is dominion over our bodies. We get a say in what we think and what we feel and how we are and what we offer ourselves to in the world. This is really important for us to understand or to believe. But what's happened to us and what the soul is, I think what's important by this, he says it's the heart, soul, mind, and strength. He adds this idea of soul, and a lot of people just equate soul and heart. I don't think they're exactly the same. I think that the way it would be understood is that the soul in the ancient world was an integrating component. It integrates all of these things. It's what causes us to be a whole person, because all of us know we can want things and think things that are differently, and then we can do things that we don't want to do. Anybody ever done anything that you don't want to do and you can't figure out why you did it? And not only that, but you keep doing it over and over and over again. And here's what happens in the human psyche, in the soul. When you do something that you don't want to do, you create immediate dissonance. You create a disintegration. And what does your mind do? If you do something you don't want to do, or you wish you hadn't done, what does your mind begin to do? Your mind finds extraordinarily creative ways to justify it and say, this is why I did that. Surely you will understand. And if you don't understand, I'm going to demand that you understand and put yourself in my shoes. And what you begin to do is you begin to disintegrate the space between the heart and the mind and the body, and the soul begins to be divided. A divided soul, divided psyche. When your heart and your mind, and when there's not a wholeness to you, and the reality is, in the human condition, you are not created to live like that. You can't. And this is the problem. We have learned by the culture to basically to live with a dissonance, and it is costing us our souls. Do you believe that you can live whole and free and full? I believe that with all of my heart. It breaks my heart to see what is happening. It's interesting, a lot of the movement of the psyche, the study of the psyche, psychology, this has been around for a while, and please hear me correctly. We have lots of mental health professionals in our congregation. We refer frequently to a lot of mental health professionals. We have great partnerships, great respect, great partnerships with mental health professionals. This is in no way just like that. I just want you to see something, what has happened. Somewhere along the way, the word for psyche, the idea of emotional health or mental health, all became about your mind. It all became about your mind and what's happening there. And the very origins of this idea, going back to like Sigmund Freud, this is what Sigmund Freud says. He says, treatment of the psyche means treatment of sickness that occurs in the life of the soul. It was always something bigger, intended to be something bigger. It's about us. And when you begin to understand there's something more to you than just taking care of yourself, it starts to help you understand that part of this is for how you are connected. Connected to other people, connected to the work that you're called to do, created to do, connected to the world around you, connected to all these things. And what you begin to realize is that we have been made. One of the things I love about this passage, Jesus says, the first commandment is this, to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind and your strength. And he says the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. To love your neighbor as yourself. The first command, the first rule of ordering is to love God. To put yourself, to incline yourself towards him first. And that out of that, everything else will flow from there. We're made to live in relationship with God, and out of that relationship find meaning and purpose in all others. One of my statements, and I believe this to my core, that you and I have been made by God and for God. You've been made by God and you've been made for God. If that is true, then you will never find meaning and purpose in any other pursuit without this one being righted first. And this is really important. You've got to consider what you believe about this, because we are demanding things from one another and demanding things from this world that perhaps it can't offer. Larry Crabb, a psychologist, he wrote this. He says, does the insistence that this life provide more satisfaction than it can, and our determination to figure out some way to get it, lie beneath what we now call psychological disorder? That you are demanding that relationships and perceptions and approval and security, you're demanding that this life and your pursuits do more than they can possibly do, and you just double down and continue to try to do it over and over and harder and faster, and it just continues to disintegrate your soul. Is there something about who we have become, who we're intended to be, that holds hope in all of this. I want you to consider something. This is sort of my style if you're new to Port City Church. Even though I say if God created life or if you've been made by God and for God, it's not because I'm wishy-washy about it. It's because I recognize there are people who come in here and you've got questions and you've got doubts and you've got experiences that lead you to have, hey, I'm not really sure about this. And our posture is not going to be to go, hey, let us tell you why we're right and you're wrong. Our posture is going to be to extend ourselves towards you to help you. That's what it's always going to be. And so when I say this, I want you to consider something. I want you to think about it. You've got to decide what you believe about this. I can't do it for you. That Jesus Christ provides the foundation and the way for the life that you actually want. That's sort of the foundation for me. And you've got to decide if that's what you believe, if that's what you think. Jesus was always, the longer I read the scriptures and follow Jesus, the more, it used to just be maddening, because every time you would ask Jesus a question, he would give you like another question and then some story that doesn't seem to make sense. And because I grew up in the church, you're supposed to pretend it makes sense and go, oh yeah, I know exactly what he means, even though you have no idea what it means. And so here's another one. Jesus has this whole scene in John chapter 9. He heals a guy who's been born blind. They're all questioning, was this guy's parent sinner who sinned? They have this whole exchange. Jesus heals him, tells him not to tell anybody. He tells somebody, and then he gets in big trouble. And so then all the Pharisees are coming to Jesus. They're mad at him. And Jesus tells the Pharisees a story. It's found in John chapter 10. And he begins by kind of talking about the Pharisees and kind of giving them he gives them this metaphor, this story. And he says, very truly, I tell you Pharisees. And he basically sets up a story. There's a pen, a sheep pen, and there's a gate. And he says, anyone who climbs over the fence, right, doesn't go through the gate, that person's a thief and a robber. But anyone who walks up to the gate and goes in is the shepherd, right? Whoever the gatekeeper opens the gate for is likely to be the shepherd. He just uses this idea. And he says the gatekeeper knows who he is because he knows him. The sheep know who he is because he knows him. But anybody who's not the shepherd or the sheep don't know, they don't follow him because they don't know his voice. That's the whole point of this parable. And I think the Pharisees are going, well, duh. And when they say that, Jesus says, let me add something to this. This is what I want you to see, because this holds one of the most famous verses about what we're talking about in here. John chapter 10. Starting in verse 7, and then they said, we don't understand what you're saying. What's the point? Jesus says again, very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. Does anyone see a problem with that? Because the story he just told was about the shepherd being known by the sheep, and therefore he can go in and out. And Jesus is like, I'm actually the gate. We're like, what in the world are you talking about? And it goes on. It doesn't get any better. All who've come before me are thieves and robbers. This is really important to get this because a lot of us have a picture in our head of what I'm about to read that may not be complete. All who've come before me, trying to convince or to help you produce the kind of life that you want, all of them have undermined. They're crawling through another way because they're not coming through me. They've all come other ways. Therefore, they are thieves and they are robbers. I am the gate, he said, but the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate, he says again. Whoever enters through me will be saved. Now, let me be really clear. He is not talking about going to heaven when you die. That is not at all how they would have understood it. Do I believe that's important? Yes, I believe that's important, but a lot of us have made that the only thing, so we miss out on what Jesus is actually talking about. He says, all who come through me will be saved. They will find deliverance. They will find deliverance from captivity and from bondage. And what's the next phrase, right? He says, they will come in and they will go out and they will find pastures. They will go in and they will go out. They will move throughout their life and they will find sufficiency. They will find that what they are looking for is actually given to them. Every person listening to this would have known Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He makes me lie down in the green grass. They would have understood all of this. When Jesus is using this metaphor, he is putting a picture in their head. He's putting a picture in their head. If I said, hi, it's me, I'm the problem, it's me, right? You would all have a picture in your head. If you don't, you would be like us trying to read the Bible from the modern world. Right? They all knew this. They knew this. And so when Jesus says, he says, I'm the gate. If you come through me, you're gonna find salvation. You're gonna go in and out of and find pasture. You're gonna find this sense of wholeness. And then he adds this verse 10. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. This isn't about Jesus giving you what you want so you can do whatever you want, which is our version of what it means to have life. This is about us stumbling upon, following, learning to trust into the life for which you have actually been created, for which you can find a sense of fullness regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in. Right? Most of what you'll read continuing here, Jesus is not promising you that things are going to go perfectly well. Instead, he says things like this: in this world, the wheels are going to come off. But take heart, I've overcome the world. In me, you'll find this sense of peace. You'll have this sense of life, this abundance of life, that you'll be able to go in and out of the normal course of your life, and you'll find pasture, you'll find sufficiency in it. The thieves that come and steal aren't just the thief. It's all the things that undermine your soul. It's all the things that you and I do to try to project or to preserve or demand or to take. These are all things that undermine the things that we try to justify. And I see this all the time. People pursuing things, their affections, their attractions, their allegiances, all these things they're pursuing. And what does the mind immediately try to do? It tries to justify the heart. And it's immediate dissonance. And the soul pays the price. This is exactly what Jesus says. I've come to do something different than this. And I'm gonna say this, I've said it before, I'll say it again, I'll probably say it 15 years from now. But the reason this is so important, because whatever it is that gets your attention is ultimately gonna get your affection. Whatever it is that catches your eye is eventually going to catch your heart. And this is exactly how the scriptures teach us, that whatever it is, the love that you encounter is going to form what it is that you love. Whatever it is that you set your sights on and say, that's what I'm after, that's what I'm looking for, that's what I want, it's going to form the desires inside. We just spent a whole time talking about this over the last 3 months of summer. Proverbs 15 even says this. It says it very clearly. It says, those who make these idols, and he's talking about anything that we use to drive life from, to pull it into our center, whoever makes these idols will become like them. You will bear the image, you will come to bear the image of the thing that you love. So what does Jesus tell us is the greatest ordering command for the human being? To love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your might, and all of your mind. Why does he tell you that? Because you will come to bear what you learn to love, and you have been made by God and for God, and no other pursuit will ever bring you the life that you want. That's a big statement, I'm aware. But if it's true, then it matters immensely who and how you learn to trust. The last thing I want to say, I want to read this because this is a prayer from Paul in Ephesians chapter 3, and I've come to love these prayers for different reasons. As I get a little older, and I used to be able to say I'm older than I look, but now people point out my gray hair quite frequently, and I'm a little offended by it. But I've been doing this for a while, and what my concern is not anymore for me or for our church today. My concern in my heart is for the church a decade from now and 2 decades from now and a generation from now. That's where my concern is. That's why you see all the college students and the internships and all the things that we do as a church, because we are actively trying to understand the church a generation from now, today, so we can be ready and start to developing in the ways that God leads us. It takes all of us cooperating together. This is not one generation telling another generation how to do it. It's us working together to understand what God longs to do in his church. And you'll see this in this passage. In fact, this passage in chapter 3 of Ephesians, is one of the most famous passages that people use to basically say, this is gonna be awesome, more awesome than we thought it was gonna be. And it's usually about raising money or building something big or doing something cool. And we say this: God is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or think or even imagine. I imagine cool cars and lots of fun stuff. And if I can imagine that, he's gonna do even more. And he says there's power in the church throughout the generations. And he is elevating his people. He's elevating the collection of individual people who are going to be his people and bear his image with accuracy and with integrity and with influence in this world in which we live. We're going to get into that more in a few weeks. But this is his prayer, and I want you to listen to this, because if you think about this, right? Jesus says, love the Lord your God. We're saying that whatever it is that you love will eventually form, and you'll come to bear the image of the thing that you love. And then here's Paul's prayer for his little church that he has going on. I think we can all kind of get on board with this as well. Chapter 3, verse 14, the book of Ephesians. For this reason I kneel before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth derive its name. I pray that out of your glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit. Where? In your center. In your center. Do you know why? Because organizing and arranging your circumstances does not equal wholeness and fullness in the center. Paul says, I'm praying that God's Spirit, the one whom you've been created for and whose image you're intended to bear, will root there and begin to form there, that you will be strengthened inside of your soul. There'll be an integration of your whole life around this. And here's the reason: so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. Do you realize that almost, and I haven't exhausted it, so I can't say every, but almost every place in the scriptures, in the New Testament, where it talks about this idea, it is almost always talking about being reconciled to the Father, to God. The whole point is that Jesus would live in you, that you would be his dwelling place, which is precisely what's written for us in the very beginning of our Bibles, that we would be his dwelling place so that we would live in a relationship with God the Father. We'd be reconciled to the relationship for which we have been created, so that out of that relationship, everything else can flow. Does that make sense? That's exactly what he's saying. We need strength in our inner being to be reconnected and to live with God himself. And I pray that you, being rooted and established, and your drivenness and your clever strategies and your success and your prowess to get things right, that's not what he says. Being rooted and established, finding your security in his love, may have the power, together with all of the people, to grasp how wide and how long and how high and how deep is what? The love of Christ. Of all the things that he could have prayed for this fostering of his work in our lives, to be more obedient, to be better, to understand the scriptures better. He says, no, I want you to be able to begin to grasp the love that God has for you. In this is love, not that we loved God, but he first loved us and he sent his son to be an atoning sacrifice for our sins. This is how we know of God's love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He did all of this as a demonstration of his love for you and for me, to redeem us and return us to the life for which we have been made and the life that you most want. And he adds this at the end, verse 19. He says, and to know this love that surpasses knowledge. It surpasses our capacity to imagine or understand or consider or any of those things. It surpasses this. Why? That you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God himself. This is God's heart for you and for me. This is his love for us, that we would begin to grasp and even not even understand, to see, to encounter how wide and how long and how high and how deep is the love of God, so that you and I will begin to understand or experience what it means to be filled with all the fullness for which he has intended. So here's what I want you to do. This is kind of your to-do. We got 2 weeks. 2 weeks to arrange your life. I didn't know, I may have missed something. I didn't know it was funny. I made a joke and didn't even know it. Y'all can tell me why it was funny later on, because I have no idea. I want you to take these next 14 days seriously, and I want you to begin this by asking you to trust something. I want you to trust that you have been made by God and for God. That you have been made to bear his image. And from that, could you ask him and seek and hope to grasp the love that God has for you, that you've been meant to live and to exist. I'm not just talking about your purpose because you're supposed to do something. I'm talking about you've been intended to actually be here, to belong. And if you start to believe this, begin to grasp how high and how long and how wide and how deep is this love of the God whose image we are to bear. I hope that you'll use the devotions. I hope that you'll come back next week. If you're a college student, get here Tuesday night. Get here Tuesday night. The decisions and rhythms that you develop in the next 2 weeks are likely to determine the trajectory. Get here Tuesday night. Go talk to our folks out in the atrium. But you're meant to live this way, to live full and free. We're going to spend the next few weeks understanding how we can experience this kind of life. Do you know what it is that most threatens this way of life, the way of life that you have actually been intended? Do you know what it is that threatens that? Do you know? I'm going to tell you next week. Father, would you help us that somehow this life that we most want isn't found in what we accomplish. It isn't found in how educated we are, how much money we have, how well we steward what we have. It's found in your love for us. Father, would you help us to learn what it means to love you with all of our heart, with all of our mind, with all of our strength, and with all of our soul, believing and trusting that whatever it is that we love is what we will become. And Father, we want the life for which we have been made. I ask you to help us to believe that and to help us incline our lives and arrange our lives towards that end. And I ask all of this in the name of your Son, Jesus, who is our King. Amen.